alone as you may hope to be. Without making so much as a peep, something, or rather someone, could be lurking in the shadows. As much as this sounds like the beginning of a typical scary story made up to spook you, it is actually the beginning of something much more horrific and 100% true. This is the truth behind the serial killer who infamously haunted the streets of the greater Los Angeles area in the early 1980s. This is the nightmarish tale of the Night Stalker. What is up, Ewu crew?
Who the fuck is
the
Ewu?
story we have for you today
They called us the
is one
Ewu crew.
you are probably familiar with, though you may not know the half of it. The tale of Richard Ramirez will convince you to double-check the lock on your own doors before
Is Purple Lab
going to
disbanded
sleep,
now?
because, as you'll soon realize, the most terrifying monsters in this world are the ones who walk among us.
That's true.
Now, let's get into it. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born on February 29th, 1960
He was from Texas?
in El Paso, Texas.
Bro, why does this nigga have hundreds of women writing to him? He's a
Ricardo,
fucking monster.
who was most often referred to as Richard throughout his life, was the youngest of his 5 siblings. Richard's parents, Julian and Mercedes Ramirez, had initially moved from Juarez, Mexico to El Paso.
How long is it? It's like 29.
When Julian
I'm gonna get on
had
some
the
games after this last
opportunity
video I'm
to
watching.
work on the Santa Fe Railroad. Julian, who had been a Mexican national and former policeman from Juarez, was known to be quick to anger and often took his frustrations out on whoever was nearby. Unfortunately for Richard, he was all too
They
often
see safety in befriending the
Julian's
monster? What
personal
the
punching
fuck?
bag. Physical abuse has a wide range of negative effects on people, especially children.
So
when
this
they
nigga was abused
experience
as a kid?
abuse from a young age. For Richard, violence was a part of his everyday life.
The fuck?
And this was only exacerbated when Richard's older cousin, Miguel Mike Ramirez, decided to take him under his wing.
My bad. Nah,
As a
Purple Lab
decorated
FC
United
it's not
States Army
disbanded.
Green Beret, Mike was no stranger to violence and would come to shape Richard into the monster he inevitably became. After returning home from various combat zones, Mike would provide Richard with detailed retellings
Nah,
of
yeah,
his
I know.
gory and
A big boy used to be like,
gruesome
not
pursuits
wanted.
during the Vietnam War. Mike glorified every aspect of his abuse of Vietnamese women.
Let me know if
and
he
would
hoop.
even
I bet.
show Richard Polaroid photos of his victims, who were often bound and gagged
Yeah, but
while
Jim.
Mike posed with their bodies.
Bro, what the hell?
In addition to Mike's willingness to expose young Richard to stories of his own violent endeavors, he also taught him some of the various skills he had picked up in the military, horrifically including stealthy ways to commit murder. Mike was one of Richard's closest friends for the majority of his childhood and early adolescence.
This is not a good nigga to have around you.
So, when Mike wasn't around, Richard was left feeling rather alone. This sense of lonesomeness, combined with his father's constant maltreatment, led Richard to frequently sneak out of the house. In the middle of the night, Richard would slip out just to go sleep in his town's local cemetery.
The fuck?
There he found a little bit of peace in one
No,
of the
I'm not.
strangest locations.
Why is he? Bro, this nigga's
Though
insane.
any sort of peace was not easily found for Richard. By the time he was 13 years old, he witnessed death firsthand.
Wow.
More so than that, he witnessed his cousin, his role model, murder his own wife in cold blood. On May 4th, 1973, Richard watched intently as Mike used a .38 caliber revolver to settle a domestic argument with his
Bro.
wife, Jessie, by shooting her in the
My
face.
nigga, what the fuck?
Instead of interfering or trying to assist Jessie after she had been shot, Richard simply sat back and took in the scene before him. After Jessie's
Bro.
murder and Mike's subsequent arrest, Richard withdrew from his family and his peers at school. Already known to be quiet, he became even more closed off than he had been prior to the incident. As Mike was sent to prison for his crimes, Richard was once again alone.
Bro, a
His older
kid's seen
sister,
all this.
Ruth, noticed Richard's strange behavior and was well aware of the harm he had constantly faced within the walls of their parents' home. So, she offered Richard the chance to come live with her and her husband, Roberto, for as long as he needed. Richard accepted the offer graciously, hoping that it would serve as an escape from his father's anger. Though moving in with Ruth seemed like a good idea at the time, it would ultimately shape Richard, and not in a good way.
How is it gonna be worse, bro?
What Ruth had not known about her husband was that he was a notorious peeping Tom.
Oh, GG's.
In the middle of the night, Roberto would leave the house to go on creepy
Bro,
excursions.
why are there so many niggas? Why are there so many? I ain't gonna lie. It doesn't make sense, but it kind of makes sense. Cause like, bro, the amount of like the childhoods that these niggas have, these serial killers have, bro, it's fucked. Bro, the nigga saw his uncle or his cousin shoot his wife in front of him, and he was teaching him ways how to kill people stealthily. And then he goes to a new house, and the dad is he's a peeping Tom, my nigga. Like, what?
He would peer through the windows of women and young
Bro.
girls alike for the thrill of it all. Once Richard moved in with them, Roberto started taking Richard on his nocturnal endeavors,
that makes sense.
and even taught Richard the tricks of not getting caught.
And he taught his little nigga how to not get caught.
As the good influence Richard so desperately needed, Roberto ultimately led Richard down another dark path.
Nigga could have
While living
saved him,
with
bro.
his sister, Richard began experimenting with drugs and started to rely on smoking marijuana and taking LSD. With his newfound love for hallucinogenics and all things wicked, Richard even took up Satanism.
Yeah, that's where they lost me though.
Researching satanic practices and even declared he wished to live by whatever means pleased him. Richard's interest in evil practices, abusing drugs, and spying on women increased significantly when his favorite cousin Mike
got out of jail?
was eventually released.
How do you get released from prison after shooting your wife?
1977.
I don't understand that, bro.
Despite the fact that he murdered his
Dead
wife
ass.
in cold blood just years before,
How do you get out?
Mike was eventually found not guilty of Jesse's murder by reason of insanity.
Shut the fuck out
As
of
a
here.
result of his release,
Crazy how so many lives could have been saved. Not real shit.
he once again became the strongest male figure in Richard's life. With the combined influence of Mike and Roberto, Richard started to realize what he wanted out of
Blood
life.
Meridian archetype.
Unlike some people,
I've heard
who
about
have
Blood Meridian.
careers
That's
that
it.
go
That's what the nigga who's like the dude who's like tall and he's like white. I forgot his name, bro. It's like the tall nigga who's white. He has like he has a face obviously, but he has no nose. Judge Holden, bro. I'm glad they gotta make a movie about that. But what I heard was like that Blood Meridian book is too gory to make a movie about. But I've read the book. I've seen some videos about it.
Of success. Richard wanted nothing more than to be a real-life
What video
supervillain,
open? All right.
and to be the one who
There was 3
always
movies that fell
came
through.
out on top.
Yeah, I'll watch your video open. What video though?
The thing about Richard Ramirez was that
Yeah, I
no
heard it's
one
too
could
gory.
convince him to do anything he did not want to do. Moreover, if he wanted something, he would take it for himself.
Oh hell no.
So Richard tested his luck with small, petty crimes.
Caught on
He
cam.
stole
All right.
from stores and
Link
spied
it.
on women in his neighborhood at night in the same way Roberto had taught him. These petty crimes were executed without much planning or preparation on Richard's behalf,
Nah, but
and so he was eventually caught and arrested. As Richard was just a teenager at the time of his first arrest in 1977, he was sent to a juvenile detention center and eventually released at the end of his sentence. It wasn't long after leaving juvie.
there's a kid essay realization on kids. Oh fuck shit. It's fine to read it. An essay for my second year of psych class. I hated reading it, but I learned a lot.
That Richard
Holy
found
fuck.
himself arrested once
Who
more.
wrote that book? Wasn't it the
this
nigga who wrote
time
it?
For marijuana possession
might be
in
tripping.
1982. He was initially placed on probation before eventually
Nah, I haven't done
becoming
UFC yet.
free
I'm
and
going to, though.
independent once more. Before eventually dropping out of high school, Richard
dropped
took
out of
on
high
a
school?
part-time job at his town's local Holiday Inn. There, he was instructed to clean rooms and keep things tidy around the hotel. However, the power of a universal pass
Peeping
key
Tom again.
eventually burned a hole in Richard's pocket. So Richard began letting himself into
Bro.
the rooms of guests staying at the Holiday Inn.
What the
He would
fuck?
snoop around and even take things that he found interesting or valuable in the moment.
Oh, I thought he was spying on niggas.
Soon,
Okay.
Richard became even more
Oh
daring.
yeah, he did.
He started
Yeah.
spying on guests, especially
This whole shit was it's just like crime shit. Nah, McCarthy wrote Blood Meridian and Stephen King wrote it. Oh, okay.
those who were staying in the hotel with their spouses. In one instance, Richard waited until one guest in particular left his wife alone in the room while heading out to grab something for the evening. Then,
Yeah.
knowing the man
I'ma get on games, though.
be all alone on the other side of the door, Richard used his passkey to let himself in. When the man eventually returned, he found Richard over his wife, attempting to assault her.
Wow.
The man grabbed Richard and ended up beating him senseless before police eventually arrived on the scene.
Wait, so did Richard get the shit beat out of him? I'll change my title.
Wife, attempting to assault her. The man grabbed Richard and ended up beating him
good shit, boy.
before police eventually arrived on the scene.
Beat the fuck out that lame man.
Despite the gravity of the situation, the couple who were attacked ended up dropping criminal charges.
What? You should solve a case on stream. I don't know where you buy them, but it's like a game. True Crime Podcast, they put evidence in there. Bro, why would you drop the charges, my nigga? The fuck? Bro, if it ain't, bro, what?
Because they did not want to return to Texas from their home state to testify
They
against
didn't want to fly and testify
it
against
appeared
them.
that Richard
Okay.
got away with his attempted crime,
Wow.
and all
Look,
the
that's fucking
experience
crazy.
did was give him a taste of what was possible, and he wanted far, far more.
The state
than
doesn't
that.
pay for that if they want to fly and
By
like
the time
travel?
Richard entered the 9th grade, he decided to drop out of Jefferson High School in El Paso. In the 9th grade, he decided to
Nigga
work
dropped
in
out in
math.
9th grade, gang.
By the time Richard entered the 9th grade,
Bro.
he decided to drop out of Jefferson High School in El Paso and move away from his family.
How the fuck? Where are you
He
gonna
did not
move?
want to be around his father, who tormented him, nor did he want to continue living with his sister, despite the bond he formed with her husband. At this point, Mike was in and out of Richard's life as well. When Richard was around 22 years old, he ended up moving to California. California
nigga?
would not only become his new permanent place of residence,
He has no
it
money.
would also become Richard's twisted criminal playground in the
Bro, I was a
early
retention at the time. You
1980s.
gotta live nice as fuck with
Once
a
in
part-time
California,
job.
Richard was arrested for cocaine possession and even a
Damn.
car theft charge. The combination of these two crimes led to a short-lived jail sentence. But Richard's worst crimes were just starting. In April of 1984, while in between homes,
said Cali was
Richard
washed.
often lived out of hotels, including one in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Richard had managed to find access to the hotel's basement, which was seldom entered by any of the staff. It was there, in the dark, damp basement, that Richard brutally attacked, beat, and stabbed 9-year-old
9?
Marilyn to death before hanging her lifeless body from a pipe. Despite the severity of the murder, no one initially even suspected Richard, as he had abandoned the hotel long before the young girl's body was located by officials. In fact,
My
Richard
nigga.
would not be found guilty of Mei Lung's murder.
My nigga.
Your basement that Richard any of us managed to find access to the hotel's basement, which was seldom entered by any of the staff. It was there, in the dark, damp basement, that Richard brutally attacked, beat, and stabbed 9-year-old Mei Lung to death before hanging her lifeless body from a pipe. Despite the severity
So it's crime
of the
scene
murder,
photos?
no one initially
I don't know
even
if I want to
suspected
see it.
Richard, as he had abandoned the hotel long before the young girl's
Bro,
body
what
was
the
located by officials.
fuck?
In fact, Richard would not be found guilty of Mei Lung's murder
Rest in
until
peace to Mei Lung, bro.
2009. So Richard got away with yet another crime, this time an actual murder. Escaping the suspicion of police and investigators gave Richard a sense of gruesome pride. In fact, his first successful murder lit a fire under Richard and ultimately made him insatiably hungry for more. In perhaps one of the most infamous murder sprees in California's history, Richard Ramirez
This is
set out
like
on a series
Anthony
of half-heartedly
Hernandez? I don't know
planned
who that is.
attacks on seemingly random households over the course of April 1984
So he did it for
to
about a year
August
and a
of
half?
1985. Over the span of a little over a year, Richard transformed himself into a real-life, bloodthirsty monster, becoming the Night Stalker. On June 28, 1984, the Night Stalker took the life of his second victim. This time, Richard chose
The
to
football
attack
player?
and brutally murder Jenny Vincow.
I think I remember.
Vincow was a
I think I know who you're
79-year-old
talking about.
woman who lived in a small apartment in Glassell Park, Los Angeles. Richard had stabbed the old woman to death after having forced himself on her.
Wait, did he?
Before fleeing, Richard even nearly decapitated her without leaving any evidence behind
How
to
do you-
identify him at the scene.
How does he not leave any
That
evidence
is,
behind?
except for a smudged fingerprint on the mesh screen window that had been supposedly removed for him to access the apartment. Despite the fingerprint, investigators did not even know Richard Ramirez's name at the time of Jenny Venkau's murder. However, it would not be long before the Night Stalker would make his rounds in the greater Los Angeles area and earn his infamous nickname.
Was an infancy.
Determined to kill again on March 27, 1985, just a little under a year after his last murder, Richard shot a 22-year-old woman in the face just inside the entrance of her own home in Rosemead, California. The woman, Maria Hernandez, had just pulled her vehicle into the garage upon returning home. Maria Hernandez
Rest in peace to Maria
had just
Hernandez.
pulled her vehicle into the garage upon returning home when she was met face to face with a wide-eyed Richard Ramirez, pointing a .22 caliber handgun directly at her. As he fired, Maria instinctively moved her hands up to her face in an attempt to shield herself from the bullet barreling toward her. By some luck, the keys in Maria's hands actually managed to cause the bullet to ricochet away from her face, allowing her to avoid being struck altogether.
But he hit her again.
Realizing that his shot had missed, Richard decided to flee the scene as fast as possible.
Wait, she survived?
In doing so, however, he essentially ran into Maria's 34-year-old housemate, Dale Yoshi Okazaki.
No.
At the sound of the gunshot, Dale had rushed toward the garage entrance, wherein she found Richard Ramirez staring her down with a gun. Dale tried her best to duck behind the kitchen counter to hide. Unfortunately, when Dale raised her head up to get a better look at Richard, he shot her point blank in the forehead, killing her instantly.
My bad. I'm glad the first lady didn't pass away. What was her name?
Saki, and to Maria's 34-year-old housemate, Dale Yoshi Okazaki.
That's the piece of Dale Yoshi Okazaki, bro. What the fuck? Yo, how do you do shit like this, bro?
In getaway home. Not even an hour after
evil,
escaping from Dale and Maria's Rosemead home, Richard took his next victim. As he was in need of a proper getaway vehicle, Richard successfully managed to steal a car from
Zodiac
a
Killer
30-year-old
IQ was
woman
154.
in
He was too
Monterey Park.
smart.
The woman, Tsai Lian Veronica Yu.
That is true. Yeah, why do they give these niggas like these kind of names, bro? That's facts.
Pulled out of her own vehicle by Richard, who fired 2 rounds into her face before driving off.
Like the whole Midnight Stalker, the Zodiac Killer. Like, bro, what the fuck? Like, why do they give these niggas these names? That shit is weird.
Veronica was found by passersby who had heard the commotion and the gunshots and called local authorities. By the time Veronica made it to the nearest hospital, she was pronounced dead.
I wasn't even paying
By the
attention,
time
bro.
forcefully park, the woman managed to steal a car from a 30-year-old woman in Monterey Park. The woman, Tsai Lian Veronica Yu, was forcefully
I'm not tripping, or a lot of these women's Asian.
By Richard, who fired 2 rounds into her face before driving off. Veronica was found by passersby who had heard the commotion and the gunshots and called local authorities.
He's Hispanic. Now I'm talking about the person the people that he killed. The first 9-year-old girl was Asian, and then I think there might have been the other one. Her name was Yoshi. Her last name was like Oka.
2 brutal attacks and the gunshots.
Rest in peace to Veronica
and called
as well.
local authorities. By the time Veronica and Max, within miles of each other, instantly made the news. That evening, it appeared
the
a
name of serial
monster
killer
was
some
making
cold
its
shit.
way through Southern California. A monster that the media dubbed the Walk-In Killer and the Valley Intruder. Just 10 days after his 2 successful and 1 attempted murder, Richard struck again. This time he made his way back to a home located in Whittier, California, that he had broken into in the past. Around 2 a.m., Richard let himself into the home of 64-year-old Vincent Charles Zazara, who he killed in his sleep shortly after entering the house. Though Vincent's death was quick, the sound of the gunshot awoke his wife Maxine, who had been sleeping soundly by his side.
Wow.
When it came to Maxine, Richard thought it best to keep her alive, at least for a little while, so that she could help him locate all of the valuable items the couple kept in their home. Richard beat Maxine and eventually bound her hands to keep her in place, while he searched in the drawers she had directed him toward. Much to his surprise, Maxine had actually managed to escape her bonds and maneuvered herself over to the bed. There, Maxine reached under the
They
mattress
got the gun?
and retrieved a shotgun
Yeah.
that had been hidden there since
Hopefully
the
Maxine
couple's
survived.
last break-in. Unfortunately, Maxine realized all too late that the shotgun was not loaded.
Bro.
When Richard turned his attention back to her, he was overwhelmed with anger to see her with a weapon, and he shot her 3 times with his .22 handgun. Though the gunshots killed her almost instantly, Richard was not finished with Maxine. Instead, he headed into
Rest
the
in peace to
deceased couple's
Maxine.
kitchen and retrieved a large carving knife before returning to the bloodied bedroom. There, Richard repeatedly stabbed Maxine's lifeless body and even gouged out her eyes and placed them in a jewelry box, which he left with.
Bro.
Before fleeing the scene, Richard
What
made sure to leave clear
the
footprints in the couple's
fuck?
flower beds with a pair of Avia sneakers. Richard knew that the footprints would be easily discovered by police, which they were. Investigators were sure to photograph and cast the footprints in hopes to have a better understanding of
What did he
whomever
say?
they were looking for.
Bro, the nigga literally stabbed her lifeless body and then cut her eyes
Large
out.
carving knife before returning to the bloodied
Bro,
bedroom.
this nigga's sick, bro.
There, Richard repeatedly stabbed Maxine's lifeless body and even gouged out her eyes and placed them in a jewelry box, which he left with.
Bro.
Before fleeing the scene, Richard made sure to leave clear footprints in the couple's flower beds with a pair of Avia sneakers. Richard knew that the footprints would be easily discovered by police, which they were. Investigators were sure to photograph and cast the footprints in hopes to have a better understanding of whomever they were looking for.
Nah, this nigga's sick, bro.
But the footprints were the only clues they could find. Police quickly realized that the bullets left behind at the crime scene were exactly the same as those from the Rosemead murders just days beforehand. It was evident to investigators that they were
Did you
not
catch this? Yeah, I heard it.
dealing with
This shit's
horrific
weird, bro. It's just
but
sick.
random murders. No, they were on the trail of a serial killer. For the next few months, Richard continued his murder spree with the same energy that he had started with. Only now, he relished in his ability to pull off such brutal murders.
Some people in the black pill community praise this nigga. What the fuck? Who is black? What is black pill? I don't know what that is. I'm not gonna lie. Why would you praise this nigga? What's good, Vickers?
And get away with them. His various killing styles changed as each victim presented Richard with new means of murdering them.
Nah, yeah, it's time and place,
With
bro.
most of
I'm
his
not gonna
female
lie.
victims, Richard would
It's
assault
like
them.
some videos, I don't feel like arguing with niggas about petty shit when, like, I don't know, it just feels disrespectful to the victims, bro. If I'm gonna watch the video and it's a serious video with niggas' lives, I'm gonna take it serious, gang. Because it's just like, why would I joke around in a video like this? Time and place.
Before or during killing them. Some he beat, others he shocked with electrical cords. Some were strangled, some were bludgeoned. Some he simply shot point blank before mutilating their bodies. But a rare few managed to survive the Night Stalker's attacks.
You can set me
On
in jail.
August 24th, 1985, Richard headed down to Orange County, California, to the town of Mission Viejo. There he parked his stolen vehicle down the street from the home belonging to James Romero Jr., who had just returned to California with his then 13-year-old son, James Romero III. The father and son had been on a family vacation in Rosarito Beach, Mexico, and had just gotten back on the same day that Richard Ramirez had decided to stop by and let himself in. In the dead of night, James Romero III heard a noise just outside of his bedroom window, indicating that there was definitely someone creeping around. Immediately,
Black pill is a community that thinks looks are everything. I mean, you could think that, but like glorifying this nigga who did this shit to all these people is weird.
young James woke his sleeping parents, thinking there was some kind of bad guy lurking in the shadows. Realizing that the lights in Romero's home all turned on at the same time, Richard thought it best to abandon his planned attack if it could not be a stealth one. Before he could get away,
Why does
however,
America idolize killers? I don't even think it's all of America. It's just, bro, we're weird. Our country's weird, bro. You gotta realize a lot of niggas in America, they don't go through struggle, my nigga. They be so bored, so they really look for anything to just idolize, bro. I ain't gonna lie.
James III managed to note the color,
Niggas don't
make,
go through
and
no
model
struggle,
of
bro.
the car Richard had been driving. More so than that, he had even managed to memorize at least part of the license plate number. A 13-year-old boy had managed to obtain more information on Richard than any investigator to date. James Romero Jr. promptly called police, thinking they had chased away a potential thief. Little did they know that they had come minutes away from being the Night Stalker's next victims. Shortly after his failed attempt at the Romero's home, Richard... found himself breaking into the house of Bill Carnes.
Say a speech after this. Hold on, bro.
Erickson. As per Richard's infamous fashion, he let himself into the house and snuck his way into the couple's bedroom. There he woke 30-year-old Bill Carnes from his sleep by cocking his .25 caliber handgun. As Bill lifted his head in search of the sound's source, Richard shot him 3 times. Then he turned to Inez. Richard looked the frightened woman dead in the eye and told her that he was the Night Stalker.
Bro, like, this nigga gets a kick out of this. This nigga's sick, bro.
Swearing up and down that she loved Satan.
Bro.
All the while, Richard beat her and bound her with her fiancé's neckties from the closet.
My nigga.
After assaulting her, Richard managed to steal what valuables and cash he could find. Before leaving Bill to bleed out, Richard locked eyes with Inez once more and decided to leave her alive.
Wow.
Instead of executing her, he told her, quote, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." Once Richard fled the scene, Inez managed to break away from her bonds and rush over to her neighbor's home to ask for help. Ultimately, Bill managed to survive his injuries after having the 3 bullets surgically removed.
I'm glad Bill survived, bro.
As she had been left alive, Inez was able to provide police with the information they so desperately needed.
This nigga's cold-hearted, yeah, bro. He's not a real human being.
Who had been slaughtering people in the Los
Angeles. You niggas is demons, bro. I'm not even gonna lie, bro.
Police were also once again able to photograph and cast the footprints left in and outside the home. Just 4 days later, the stolen car was located back in Los Angeles, and despite his efforts to wipe the vehicle clean, investigators were able to find a single fingerprint on the car's rear-view mirror. The fingerprint was run through the police databases and found to be a positive match for Richard Ramirez. The next day, Richard's name and face were released to the public. The whole state of California and beyond knew the Night Stalker's true identity. On August 30th, 1985, Richard had decided to visit his brother who lived in Tucson, Arizona. Unbeknownst to him, his face was plastered on every newspaper and every television station in the state of California. Unfortunately for Richard, there was an issue with meeting up with his brother, and so he backtracked his travels to return to Los Angeles. Richard ended up back in LA early on the morning of August 31st, and though he didn't know it, investigators had been tracking his every move. Police believed that the Night Stalker would attempt
why do you like the gym?
An outbound.
Shit, I don't know. I don't know. I just like going. I ain't gonna lie. I don't even really like going. It's just a routine. I don't go to the gym because it hurts. I don't know. Probably the results is probably why I like going.
Bus. So they lined up all over the block in the hopes to stop him. Richard had noticed the police.
You could put it faster since people would stop complaining. I realize just one nigga complaining.
And avoid being spotted as he walked into a nearby convenience store.
Gym talks during this is wild. I tried to keep it short though.
Caught a glimpse of him. The group of old Mexican women shrieked in fear and called out frantically that the man before them was none other than El Matón, the killer. Richard looked around in a panic as he realized that dozens of magazines in the store had one face.
Damn, they got this nigga's face?
Him, his own. Richard fled from the store as fast as he could and even darted across the busy Santa Ana freeway in the middle of traffic in an attempt to get away. In his mad dash for a hiding place, Richard attempted to carjack a variety of vehicles, but was unsuccessful in each attempt. All of a sudden, bystanders watching Richard run realized they were in the presence of the Night Stalker in broad daylight. Together, a group of residents from the neighborhood managed to tackle him to the ground.
Shout out to the people.
One resident even managed to strike Richard over the head with a metal bar. forcing the serial killer to
Zeke,
fall
you
to
think
his
there's a serial
knees
killer
in
out right
pain.
now we don't know about?
The
Definitely.
group of Good Samaritans relentlessly beat the subdued Richard
Hey, W,
until
beat on that
police
nigga.
arrived and promptly arrested him for his brutal crime spree. Richard was then finally taken to court for his horrific attacks and murders. He is famously remembered for shouting during the court
The
proceedings
fuck?
and drawing a pentagram on his hand, which he showed to the
Bro,
court,
this nigga's
as
not
well as
right.
another in his blood on the wall of his cell.
Bro.
Interestingly, the state of Richard's teeth ended up being a turning point in his trial. Richard was known to have decaying teeth, and by the time he was in jail, 9 of his teeth were rotting,
My nigga,
while some were
what?
missing altogether from both his upper and lower jaw. His father had provided him with an alibi during his trial, stating
he'll be
that
cooked,
Richard
Angel.
had been in Texas during one of the weeks where there had been 3 attacks, and therefore could not be the killer. Yet a dentist from Los Angeles later testified that he had actually treated Richard for his rotting teeth during that time period, proving that his father had lied. On September 20th, 1989, Richard Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual
Our teeth
assaults,
evidence.
and
They're saying teeth evidence because the dad said he was in Texas when 3 of the murders happened, but he had gotten his rotting teeth fixed around the time, so the dad was lying.
14 burglaries. On November 7th, 1989, Richard was sentenced to 19 respective death
Dang,
sentences
19
in the
de-
state of California via gas
Holy
inhalation.
fuck.
After his sentencing was revealed, Richard told reporters, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." That quote alone sent shivers down the news reporters' spines. But perhaps one of the most chilling parts of Richard's trial
Raped minors,
was the
bro.
overwhelming obsession that countless women had with the man who wreaked havoc throughout Southern California. In fact, multiple women who claimed to be fans of Richard would write
Weird,
him letters
bro.
and even pay him visits.
I ain't gonna lie, every single one of these women, I'm not gonna lie, y'all are sick too, nigga. Why? Why do y'all like that shit, bro? I don't understand. The nigga's teeth are rotting and he's killed hundreds, or not hundreds, but he's killed multiple people. He's committed essay on kids, my nigga. But women want this dude, bro. That's what I'm saying. Human beings are evil, bro. Like,
It's in prison.
shit is sick, bro.
One woman in particular, Doreen.
Who is
Leroy,
Doreen? What does she look
wrote
like?
Richard around 75 letters in
Bro.
total during his incarceration.
Why? Like, why?
Doreen described Richard as, quote, "He's kind, he's funny, he's
My
charming.
nigga.
I think he's a really great person. He's my best friend. He's my buddy." Richard asked
Bro.
Doreen to
Is
marry
it power
him,
dynamic?
and despite the fact that he would be in prison for the rest of his life until he was executed, they were
That's what I'm
married
saying. She's
within
calling
the
him a
walls
great
of San
person.
Quentin State Prison in October of 1996. For years after their official wedding
He
date,
was married in prison.
Doreen swore to reporters, friends, and family members alike
Oh, this Doreen?
that she would take her life the same
You're
day
capping.
that Richard was to be
Is
executed.
she still alive, right?
However, their supposed love did not seem to last. Doreen eventually left Richard for one reason or another that was never expressed publicly.
Maybe because he was a fucking serial
Though
killer?
some have speculated Doreen became disturbed at Richard's lack of empathy for his crimes.
Oh, well, now
Richard did not.
Yo, bro, like, you're surprised that he lacks empathy for his crimes, gang? Like, come on, bro. The people that wrote to him have no respect? Nah, yeah, they don't. I ain't gonna lie, y'all didn't even think about that. Bro, they have no respect for humans in general. You're gonna call this nigga a great person and kind who's killed innocent people and a 9-year-old girl at the beginning for no fucking reason. Like, what? That nigga teeth like he eat
Not
ass?
seem to mind much.
I ain't gonna lie, I haven't seen it
In
though. I'm
fact,
gonna look it up.
Richard eventually ended up engaged yet again, this time to a 23-year-old writer, Christine Lee. Because of the state of California's notoriously lengthy appeals process, Richard Ramirez would have been in his early 70s by the time his execution was properly carried out. However, the infamous Night Stalker never made it that far.
How do you die? Like
On
to
June 7th,
STD or something? Hepatitis?
2013, Richard died of complications secondary to B-cell lymphoma.
Oh, isn't that
at
cancer?
Marin General Hospital in Green Bay, California, at 53 years old. Though Richard can no longer torture the residents of the greater Los Angeles area, his victims and their families feel little closure in the Night Stalker's death. Rather, Richard Ramirez's story serves as a reminder that monsters are real and they are vicious. Richard was a cruel killer, one with no remorse whatsoever. If you take anything away from this episode, we hope
I think it's that
is
bloodhound
this.
checking in. Everyone checking in.
Lock your doors, stay alert, and remember to always double-check the shadows. You never know what or who could be lurking there, just beyond your field of vision.
All right, the nigga was clip farming at the end right there, talking about you never know what's in the shadows. Yo, bro, what did this nigga's teeth look like? What was his name? Richard? Oh, what the fuck? Yo, why is this on a, bro, this is why I'll never, bro, don't use Reddit, my nigga. Bro, why is he on a website called Teeth Prawn, bro? What is this?